I wasn't born a leader. I definitely developed all of my skill sets, and I actually was very blessed by having some great mentors and managers throughout my career.
Hello and welcome to the Service-Based Business Society podcast. I am your host, Tiffany-Ann Bottcher. If you are ready to scale your success, grow your business, and live that entrepreneurial life, click subscribe because we're about to get started. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. This is season 4, episode 21, and today we're diving into a topic that so many business owners can relate to: becoming an accidental leader. You start with a great idea, turn it into a business, and before you know it, in order to scale, you're leading a team. But leadership isn't always something that entrepreneurs set out to master. It's often something they grow into. And that's exactly what we're talking about today. Joining me on the podcast is Jim Carlough, a seasoned leader with over 30 years experience in the healthcare and technology industries. He's been in the C-suite, he's led high-performing teams, he's turned struggling portfolios around, and navigated major mergers and acquisitions. And if that wasn't enough, he wrote a book on leadership, The 6 Pillars of Effective Leadership, a roadmap to success. Jim's approach to leadership is shaped not just by his professional journey, but by deeply personal experiences that have influenced his perspective on resilience, growth, and leading with intention. We're going to talk about what it really takes to step into a leadership role as a business owner, the challenges that come with it, and how to do it well without losing sight of the vision that started it all. Welcome to the show, Jim.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here this morning.
It's such an important topic, leadership in business, and whether you have a giant business or a small emerging business, scaling business, leadership really is the key piece. We talk a lot on the podcast about mindset and it being a real difference maker, but ultimately leadership is really kind of sharing your mindset externally.
I would totally agree with that statement. For me, leadership was not natural at first. When I first started in business back in, unfortunately, the early 80s, making me very old, it was a lot different. And I remember one of my first management negative interactions was when an employee decided to elevate their voice to get their point across. And I unfortunately reacted in almost a similar way and really learned a lot from that exercise. But as I've developed as a leader, I've also learned that a lot of this is human nature and working with people as individuals and understanding certain key elements that will make you a more effective leader. And that's really what prompted me to write the 6 Pillars of Leadership. So anyway.
So one of the pieces that really kind of jumped out at me is you talk a lot about, leadership being learned and not necessarily something that you're born with. And I always felt, and so my leadership journey, I've shared quite a bit on the podcast, was not something I ever, set out to do or be a part of. And a part of my more corporate career, that was definitely kind of the direction. And then now starting my own business and growing a team, and we have kind of multiple teams at this point. So leading is part of the core. There's no way to do what I'm doing and not be leading people. But I always felt like I was missing this, what I called kind of this charismatic, visionary leader piece that I felt like you had to be born with in order to do that effectively. And so now I'm really learning that I've kind of, I don't think I'll ever be what I define as that charismatic visionary leader, but I don't need to be. I've found ways to lead in my own style. And so when your book came across my email, I was like, hey, that's very interesting. And I wanted to dive more into the topic with you.
I'm sort of the same kind of background. I wasn't born a leader. I definitely developed all of my skill sets, and I actually was very blessed by having some great mentors and managers throughout my career. And they really, really made a difference in my life. My first leadership opportunity, ironically, I received the same year I graduated college, and I was elected a city councilman at the age of 23.
Wow.
That thrust me into leadership immediately. I had never dealt with, a union before, and we had more than one union in the community, let alone deal with not corporate bureaucracy, but more civil or citizen-led bureaucracy dealing with the public directly. So even though it was a small town in New Jersey, 13,000 people, it was really an eye-opening experience from my perspective. And I also believe that it's a learning leadership is a learning process that never ends. And like you, I don't necessarily believe I'm that charismatic leader that can get up like Steve Jobs used to be able to do and rally the crowd, or like some of our former presidents have been able to do. But the reality is, I don't know that you have to be a charismatic leader. I think you have to be an attentive leader. And one of the other things somebody asked me long ago is, does your leadership start when you get in and sit down at your desk? And my response was no. Leadership is 24/7, and it starts when you exit your vehicle, walking into the office building and the people you interact with. And that led to a whole discussion about the difference between leaders who engage with people and leaders who don't. And I don't think you need to be a visionary, but you have to not be afraid to interact with the people that you with.
Absolutely. I think that there's also this element of either starting in kind of a leadership position or kind of ascending into leadership. And sometimes that can be a bit of a transition, especially if you've been really a part of the team and now, you've maybe been promoted into some kind of leadership position. And now you feel like instead of, kind of being with the people, now you have to kind of guide the people. And there's this shift. And sometimes that can be a real challenge as you kind of learn to be a leader and do so kind of while also kind of leaving certain parts of your old role behind. I find that that is actually more difficult at times than kind of starting in a leadership position and building relationships based on that dynamic.
I would agree with that, because if you look at the dynamics of a team, if I was managing or if I was on a team of 10 people, and then all of a sudden I was asked to be promoted, most of those 10 people ate with me or had coffee break with me or whatever every day. And we talked life outside of work. We may have done things outside of work. And then when you become their manager or their leader, now there's a reporting responsibility. That can create unique challenges, especially for a first time manager. And so for a first time manager or leader being thrust into that, they already know the company, they already know the products they're serving, they already know the function of the team, but now they have to transition from potentially friend to manager. And that transition can be difficult. And there's really no roadmap to follow in terms of what are the key elements, which as I looked around at what leadership books were out there, I said, I think this is something that may be missing. And so my book is perfect for somebody who's in that position of first time leader, being promoted to leadership of an existing team or from within an existing team, and just looking for what are the key things that I have to be able to instill to really be successful.
Absolutely. I reflect a lot on my time, kind of progressing into leadership as well. And I find it almost my daughter is turning 12 this year. And so I remember being 12. And it's interesting as you move through life, you always feel like you've kind of got it all. I think back to being 12 and I was like a grown up. And I look at her and I'm like, not like my feeling of what I was at 12 versus what I see as being 12 is very different. And then I think about, you go through, university or whatever, and you feel like you've got it all figured out once you're leaving. And then you realize, you start the workforce, you realize you don't, that's very different. And so you kind of go through these kind of ebbs and flows of life. And so I look back now at some of the pieces of leadership that were a challenge. And I definitely, was part of the team and then moved into leadership. And I was often a lot younger than a lot of the people. And I don't know that that was a thing for them. I think it was a thing for me more than like in terms of I respected them so much and now leading them. And so, and now I look back and I think, gosh, I would do it so differently now. And I think that, every part of life, hindsight is 2020. But when I left corporate, I really felt like I'd done so much growing and I'd been with the same company for over 10 years. And I felt like people who were there had really been there through all sorts of kind of growing. And I felt like I was never going to get to not like drop the things that I wasn't good at or hadn't been good at 10 years ago unless I left. And that was a real struggle for me because I didn't want to leave. really, for a while. I didn't want to leave. But then I was like, but all of these people have watched me grow up, basically. And they, they remember or still critique things that I was like, hey, I haven't done that in like 8 years, though. And so, now if we shift that into business ownership, people going through that same journey, if it's your business, well, you're not leaving. So now you have to figure out how to navigate that and realize that you are going to make mistakes and you are going to grow. And unless you have turnover on your team, which, obviously we all don't necessarily want, you are going to have to figure out how to navigate that and keep going and not think, well, I need a fresh start to kind of kick off from where I know now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I often say nobody said life was easy. And I've told my grown children that, we never told you life was going to be easy. And my daughter often will say, and she's turning 30, she'll often say, Dad, I really don't like this adulting thing. And it's interesting to see and hear that perspective. Now, all of my children are very successful. So I'm very, very blessed and lucky. So I give a lot of credit to my wife, who really did the day-to-day raising of the kids while I worked and traveled and did what I had to do. But it's real interesting whether you're a small business owner or a medium-sized company owner or just thrust into that position. You all of a sudden now have to pivot and start to think about things you didn't think of before. And, one of those things is empathy and being able to understand what your employees are going through. And that's something that you're not born with. You have to learn that. And when I worked for Perot Systems, which was owned by Ross Perot for a period, almost a decade. And I had one of my teams was a team of software engineers, support people, account management people, about 25, maybe 30 people on the team. And we were going to be sunsetting the product that they had been working on for 10 years for newer technology. And I thought to myself, I have to tell these people that their jobs are going away, but they're not going away tomorrow. And I struggled with what would I want to be told from my manager that would make me want to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a real reflective opportunity for me to try to put something together that to be different. So I actually went to the entire team and said to them, I will promise you, I will give you as much notice as possible before your position is impacted. That's number one. Number two, if you want to learn the new technologies and transition into that at the point we don't need this role, I will provide that. Three, if you decide this is not for you and you want to exit, whether within the company or externally, I will help. What I didn't expect to happen, what I was hoping to happen was to keep everybody until I didn't need them. I achieved that goal. What I did not expect is for 2 straight years, that department had the highest employee satisfaction level in the entire organization of more than 15,000 people. I never expected that. And it really taught me a valuable lesson about understanding, being able to put myself in that person's shoes and being able to convey that. And not one person left. Everybody stayed. Many of them are still in touch with me today.
It's incredible when you can go through a situation like that and kind of come around the other side and it not necessarily go exactly how you thought, because that is, I mean, people don't like uncertainty. And so when people hear, my job is ending, first of all, people are upset. Like there's an emotional component to that for sure. So now people are kind of dealing with the emotional piece and the uncertainty of the future. I mean, those two things together to navigate that's quite the
It is, which is even more the reason why I was shocked to see the satisfaction ratings. I literally was shocked. And I think I gave everybody a sense of purpose for a period of time and an understanding that I had their back. And I think that also tied with empathy, I think is important for a leader. Leaders have to understand that their employees want to make sure that their back is covered. I mean, if you take the example of the military leader, he's got to cover for his troops. He or she covers for his troops. If you talk about the business leader, your employees have to have a sense for you're part of the team, you're in it with me, and you've got my back. And mistakes will happen. I've made a fair number of mistakes in my career, and I've learned from every one of them, and I've never repeated the same failure or issue twice. And I think people, your employees will see that and recognize that you're not perfect. I'm far from perfect, but I'm willing to give things a try. And so I'm willing to fail for the greater good of learning something better or trying to figure something out. And so I'll roll up my sleeves with my employees and work through those.
Yeah, it's there's always this balance of being like when you're saying you're in it and you're with them, and I feel like there's this piece as you're growing in business, because one of the things I often talk about with clients is who are struggling with the like, I feel like I just have so many decisions to make and I never can make the right one, and I always say, hey, you have to kind of go back and think traditional business. And so at one point, if there was this organization, picture everyone sitting around the boardroom table and you've got HR, you've got legal, you've got accounting, you've got sales, marketing. I said, now you're all of those people. So in your mind, you've got, marketing thinking, hey, this is a great idea. And then you've got operations saying, hey, this is a crappy idea. And then you've got account. And so, you've got all of these and you're making all of these decisions as one person. And then as your business grows, you're adding in specific people. So it takes, there's kind of this, you go from one person to a group of people, small group of people. And a lot of times that small group of people has lots of jobs, because just like you as a one person, it's everybody's doing all the things. But as you grow and start, defining pieces, having specific teams with specific roles, there's kind of this secondary transition almost from, one to a few and then a few to a bigger group. And so you've kind of got this kind of multi-staged approach. And I think that, oftentimes, business owners sometimes underestimate the actual leadership skill that's required to do those things. And so just because you launched an amazing service or an amazing product or whatever, now you've got this business, started as an idea, now you've got this legitimate business. But managing people in a way that allows you to grow and scale and hit those success targets is a whole other piece that is not just developing the product or service in a way that can be more efficient or more productive, but the actual people part of these businesses is not to be underestimated.
It should never be underestimated, that's for sure. And the other aspect of it is people want to have a sense of accomplishment, but also an opportunity for growth. And I think any leader has to be able to understand what each employee wants to do today and what they want to do in the future, and work with them to make that happen. I always ask people when I do their performance reviews, what is it? What are your goals for next year? And a few years ago, somebody had a goal of they wanted to get on the board of a nonprofit. I thought it was a great idea. So we made a list of nonprofits and solicited them and found a board position, which, again, it doesn't benefit me or us directly, but it benefits the employee in their growth and development. And I think as a new leader, you have to think about not just what the employee wants to accomplish today, but where do they see themselves? And what is the pathway there to kind of learn those skill sets and or to obtain that? And so I think we as leaders have an obligation to understand what our employees want to get out of life or out of this role before they move on to the next role or up in the organization. And having a better feel for that as a manager puts you in a better spot to achieve that.
Absolutely. That actually makes me think I was kind of part of a leadership retreat many years ago. And the first whole day was really not about the organization or leadership or anything, but was really framing what did you want out of life? Because before we could figure out how we were going to get there, we had to figure out kind of where we were going. And so it was interesting because we had a group of all very similarly aged people, all very ambitious, all kind of ascending through leadership in that position. And so you think a lot of kind of common goals. And I didn't find that actually to be the case. And what each person deemed as successful was very different. And, everyone kind of all had kind of one thing that was like their thing that made them someone's like, I want to be on the cover of a magazine was like his thing. Someone else, I want to be able to buy this specific car. These were kind of like these weird kind of success markers, but all had a different lifestyle that they were going for. And so it was interesting to kind of navigate and hear just the variations. Because I think oftentimes we assume what success means to someone is similar to ourselves. And so as people are going through, one of the key pieces of leadership that I've kind of learned along the way is that you don't really know what their success looks like. So you can be kind of thinking, oh, they're going to really want to do this, or they're really, this is going to lead to that. And so really getting to know someone first so that you can understand where they want to be, and if that direction even aligns with what they're hoping for.
Totally agree with that. And in that process, you also learn a lot about the individual. I try to find and learn a lot about my employees and their families. And, it's not that I'm being nosy, but what do you do on the weekend? Or you're into kids' activities? What are they? This was my experience or whatever. I think we have a holistic responsibility as a leader to not just the employee, but the employee's family. And I actually learned that working with Mr. Perot. He was very focused on his employees and making sure that they were taken care of, especially in the time of need.
Yes. It's any time that you got these employees. And I think that there's been a very interesting shift over the last few years. I think that for a long time, people asked a lot of people who work for them, and everyone just, decided that that's how they were going to be successful. And they just did it. They worked the long hours, they did the things. And then there was kind of this transition to the quiet quitting phase, and people kind of pushing back and saying, hey, I'm not doing the extra. And so, and I think ultimately it's come back around again. And there were a lot of people in the, kind of speaker space that were talking about how, that for a while it was the hustle grind. And then everyone shifted to this whole work-life balance and, all of these things. I think ultimately it was interesting because for me, I would say a lot of the people who were talking about that were people who had already done the hustle and the grind and had set themselves up in a way that now they could tail it off. But you had people who were starting off who were like, oh no, I don't need to grind and hustle like that anymore. And I said, no, those people already earned their stripes and now they're wearing them. But you can't wear the stripes if you've not earned them yet. And so I definitely come from the hustle grind, probably to fault a little bit. And so, but it's interesting how that kind of shapes into leadership, because a lot of I talk to business owners every day, and one of the things, the most common kind of two pieces when it comes to team management in any way is, how do I motivate people to want to work like I work? Because, I would just have done it, and I would just work this hard, and they don't want to do it. And the other piece is that people, are no longer as money driven. And so, there's this, I want more personal time. I want more balance. And so, but they find those people harder to motivate. And so what would your advice be to a business owner that's feeling those two concerns?
So I'm like you, and my engine is always running at a high RPM level.
Yes.
In fact, recently a coworker announced that they were going to be retiring. And one of the comments he said is, Jim, I will never understand how you have so much energy. When somebody confronts me with that, or an employee says, that's not me. I'm like, I'm not asking you to be me. I'm asking you to understand your role and exceed in the expectations set for that role. Don't be Jim. Don't be emailing at 3:00 in the morning because you couldn't sleep. That's not what I'm asking you to do. What I'm asking you to do is achieve these specific goals. You keep your focus on those goals, we will be successful. If you can do it in 5 hours a day, so be it, right? We can give you some other things to fill in the time, but don't try to be something that's not in your DNA. And so I've had a few people that can't keep up with me, but for the most part, when I see people overworking, and I think overworking can produce a lot of stress for the individual, but also for the home life. I'll call that out directly to the individual and make them take the time to go spend it with their family. It's not uncommon for me to pick up the phone throughout my career and call somebody and say, Tiffany-Ann, you're getting off at 12:00 today. The employee say, what do you mean? Is there something wrong? No, you've been working hard. I want you to sign out. I want you to check out. I want you to go home, take your family out to dinner, and I want you to enjoy the weekend. Nobody told me to do that, but it's just when I see somebody really trying to achieve, whether they've met all their goals or not, they sometimes just need that break. And so I'll typically, give them that opportunity. I don't know why I went down that path, but it just sparked a memory in my mind. But But to your point, to get back to the question, yes, I'm in alignment with your thoughts, with your.
Yeah, that actually, makes me think. We used to, back very early on in my career, we had kind of this business mentor, and he would kind of pop in occasionally, but was not part of the day-to-day operations. But our kind of leader at that time, he was very much, working with people, but not so great with the paperwork and not so great with the more officey side. He was great with people, great sales, but not great at the kind of officey side. Multiple times I remember him just like getting progressively more and more stressed through and then this mentor would come in, and he always would bring dinner and sit down and say, okay, how are we going to, and the plan was basically to dig out of whatever the situation was, whether that was, we were behind on invoice review. He was going to sit with this person until it was done. And sometimes it was just a matter of doing it together and having that, because it was, same thing, late nights away from his family and whatever else. And so, I still know that person today, very successful, has built definitely a huge kind of empire for himself. And so you look and you say, okay, well, all of that was for something. But in those moments, especially, it can be, a little bit daunting. And so that person kind of coming in and saying like, hey, let's just get it done. And I often kind of thought, what would things have happened had that been left another, a month, 3 months, without that kind of person to come in and say, no, it's okay. Like, let's keep going. We got this. Let's just do it together. Let's just take the one off the top of the pile and let's do it.
I encourage everyone to have a mentor, and I have a mentor, and for that sole purpose of level setting with me. And in your example of the invoices, it wasn't, it was the stress of the volume of invoices that kept increasing. So they couldn't see the forest through the trees to develop a plan to get it done. So somebody comes in, throws down some food, rolls up their sleeves and says, let's do this together. Sometimes that's all that it takes. And this isn't rocket science, but having a mentor who somebody is not directly involved in that situation day to day, to be able to take a look at it and say, hey, I think I know how to help you fix this. Let's do this together. I think reduces stress and builds camaraderie, and also gets people back focused on the things that they need to do to get things done. So I can very much appreciate that leader and the volume of stuff. There are often days where I say, how am I going to get through that 200 emails that just hit since yesterday, or whatever? And having somebody to focus me is always a good thing.
Absolutely. So when you were writing the book and you were working on these pillars, how did you decide which were the most important? Obviously, it's a topic that's been written on by, there's a lot of, people who have a lot of perspectives. So how did you choose what you believe to be the most important?
It was, my list initially was probably 12 specific items. And I said to myself, 12 is going to be too much for anybody to try to handle. What are the most important characteristics that I think have made me the most successful? And I focused on those, and they are in order: integrity, which to me is non-negotiable; compassion and empathy, which a lot of people confuse the two, but they're two very, very different things; humor, because I think everybody has to have fun. You don't need to be a stand-up comedian, but I use humor to deflect during times of conflict, to kind of level set everybody and get people relaxed. Because a lot of times that confrontation is just stress generating, and somebody needs to break that ice to calm it down. And that's how I use humor. And the last two are focus and stability. And when I look at all of those aspects of it, you don't see energetic in there. You don't see working 20 hours a day in there, but you see things that are all from a human perspective, things that are not typically taught, that have to be learned. And so I said, if somebody were to say to me when I was 23 years old, here are the 6 things you need to focus on to be successful, those are probably the 6 things that were hardest for me to learn and develop over time. And I said, if somebody can do that, they'll start off and be a great leader.
So integrity is such an important piece in all parts of business. And I think that I'm going to choose my words very carefully. I think that if we have this, in my mind, that kind of visionary, charismatic leader, oftentimes as they continue through, some of those people, if you spend any long amount of time, if you come across these people in a short interaction, I find that you don't often see so many other things. But if you spend any time with working with someone for an extended period of time, then you start to see always with any person, what I call the negative underbelly of the situation. And so I would say that integrity at times can be a bit of a struggle. It's, sometimes you see something where you've heard the same story 5 times and it maybe gets different each time, or situations, or you'll be a part of a meeting where we're talking about a situation that happened and you've been there for so long that you were a part of that situation. And so it might start, in kind of a loose, not necessarily storytelling type situation, but it can progress from there. And so when you're talking about kind of a learned skill, how can we, for someone who maybe thinks, you know what, maybe I haven't been in the best of integrity, or they work with someone that they think, the integrity there is maybe not as good as it should be. How do you help someone get that back on track?
So I mentioned earlier being elected to public office. Shortly after getting elected, the city manager asked to see me. And I went and sat down and he congratulated me. And I said, Don, what can I do for you? He said, you did a great job. You're going to be a great councilman. I want to give you one piece of advice. And this is the piece of advice I would give to every leader. And he said to me, when you go home at night and you lay down and put your head on your pillow, I just want you to ask yourself one question. Did I do anything today for my own personal benefit at the expense of another individual or organization that I know was not right to do? He said, if you can answer that question every night with no, you can rest easy because you've done a good job. I ask myself that question every night since that day in 1983 when he said that to me. And to me, there's one path. And if you lose that integrity path, you'll lose the trust of your team immediately. And once you lose that trust, you'll never regain it. That's very difficult to regain. And it's something that just sticks with them. And they'll notice that. I very much, and people who will hear this, who know me, will say, yep, that's Jim, straight down the center of the roadway. And because to me, it's non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable. So hopefully that one simple question can help people if they start to think about their life and the things they do every day, whether personal or business related. Who was the benefactor of that? Was it for the common good or whatever?
It's very interesting. So when I started my business, and I have shared, I come from a tech finance background, and I always joked, it was if I could just have a closet and a computer, I was good. I was not the natural leader, and so when I started my business and when I left corporate and whatnot, I didn't really have a huge plan. I was like, well, I know how to do a lot of things, and I'm well educated, and we'll figure it out. And I quickly realized that none of that mattered until I could actually talk to people and sell them on my idea and actually start to work with them. And so, you kind of get going on this whole, I need to learn about sales. I need to learn about, influencing people and all of these types of things. And one of the things that I truly enjoyed was I kind of dove into this learning about all types of leaders and not always the good ones. I enjoy a good podcast, American Greed, this cult leaders, these types of things, because, good leaders can use their powers for not good things. And some of these people are very good at leading the wrong direction. But learning some of these techniques and pieces was kind of how I, not to use it for evil, but to kind of be able to study some of the common things between some of these people. I found it very fascinating. And, it definitely had, a different perspective for me in terms of, it's one skill set, but what are you using it for? And making sure, and integrity for me is a huge one. I often just think about if I had to put that on display, put it on a billboard later, or that kind of thing. If my kids, 10 years down the road learned about that, those are the kinds of things for me that it's like, hey, is this in integrity? Is this the right direction?
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yes. So you talked a little bit about your book. Where can people find it?
So people can find it directly from me. I've self-published it, but it's also available on Amazon as well as on Barnes & Noble. So anyone can check it out there. It's called The 6 Pillars for Effective Leadership, A Roadmap to Success. My website is simply www.jimcarlough, all connected, JIM.com. And I'd be more than happy to ship them a copy. If they send an email to me or go through my website, they'll have the ability to check off an autograph copy if they'd like.
Fantastic. And so where do you like to hang out online if someone wants to follow, check out some of your other content?
So some of my other content, I am posting all my content to my website. I'm also in the early stages of pushing it out to a YouTube channel that's not fully set up yet. So I would say stay tuned to YouTube, but definitely go to my website where we'll be linking podcast things, press releases, etc. So there'll be a lot of assets and content in the website itself.
Fantastic. So if you had one piece of advice, if people were going to listen to one thing today, what would that be?
I would say the one piece of advice I would give them is don't be afraid of being a leader. It's not that difficult. It is a learning opportunity. You're not born that way. And I truly believe that most anybody who would like to be a leader has the capability to become a leader. It doesn't have to be as hard as people think it is. And you don't always have to go to the ranks of CEO to be successful in what you're doing and to accomplish your personal goals. So it's very much achievable and out there for anyone.
That is a great piece of advice. Thank you so much for being here today, Jim.
Thank you for having me, Tiffany-Ann.
Don't forget to click subscribe, comment below, and share the episode with a fellow entrepreneur. If you want to take us on the road, we are available everywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much. See you next time.